And we're live. Hello there, BLS0012 Show and Tell with Evan Payne. Evan, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. Maybe you can introduce yourself briefly to the people watching.
Yeah. So my name is Evan Payne. I am originally from the US, but I live in Spain currently. Also spent a good number of years in Ireland. So I've been over in Europe for almost 12 years now, which is very intimidating in some ways. I'm a senior front-end software engineer at a company called NetCentric. And yeah, I've been for the last at least 5 years really heading into front-end as a career. Before then, I didn't really know what I was. And once I figured that that was my niche, it just took off, and it's the best thing I've ever done, other than married and having children and stuff. The best career thing I've ever done in my life.
Very cool. And since 5 years, you said front end. Is Angular the first front end framework you dove into, or have you dabbled around with other stuff?
Yeah, I've dabbled in plenty. I gave a talk recently on Svelte, which I played around with for a POC, and that I was very happy with. Before I touched Angular, I think I went with Vue, or maybe not. It's hard to remember at this stage because it was all back around the same time, maybe 4 years ago or so. Right. But I do remember the first production thing I worked with that was a single page app was Angular when it was almost done with beta releases. So just before Angular 2 came out, we were like, yeah, we're already going to use this on our site, so let's do it. Cool. I also worked with NativeScript, in particular the Angular flavor of that for a production project for a company. And now I've gotten, as we'll talk further, into NX and the rest of the ever-expanding world of Angular tools.
Very cool. Sounds very interesting. Yeah, so Evan reached out to me because he wanted to show stuff on the stream. This is also an open invitation. If anybody's watching and wants to show their project, I'm super interested to look at it. I think it's always fun to analyze other projects, see how it's done. So yeah, I can generally say you've been with Angular since like the beta, so you're probably like an Angular OG developer. You've seen the progress going from version 2 to version 11 that got released last week. Yeah. And still liking it.
Yeah, cool. I do. I've always liked the prescriptive nature of Angular in particular, because when I first started picking it up, I was relatively new to JavaScript too. I mean, I had done a little bit in jQuery, but I'd mostly been doing, before I moved to front-end kind of work, kind of freelance web dev stuff. So WordPress and PHP, and also self-taught. I didn't do any kind of in-depth online courses or go to engineering school or anything. So for me, having a right way to do something really helped, especially with TypeScript. I love TypeScript. Not everyone does, and I get that, but not having skipped the parts where I learned the fundamentals, having my hand held through this really has been beneficial throughout. And yeah, I don't know, not necessarily OG. I'm sure, as you'll see in my code, I have plenty of weird, bad habits and not doing things the way it should be done, but there's enough of a grid or a framework, if you will, so that I don't make too many mistakes.
Right. I think I really resonate with that feeling. And before I was a front-end dev, like in the time that I got into development, which was 2009, there wasn't like front-end, back-end. The differentiation wasn't really there. Like there weren't really front-end frameworks that much. People were with like Marionette and Backbone and jQuery UI. I got into it. Well, actually, I was developing backend mostly, as you would say right now, PHP, and then PHP got into jQuery, and then I got like in JavaScript. But if you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be writing JavaScript all day, I would have told you you're crazy and would not believe you. So, yeah. And so you're not educated as a developer. Do you have another area where you worked in before?
Yeah, I was trained as a filmmaker. Because when you grow up in Los Angeles, you're either a musician or a filmmaker, it seems like. And I went into film, and while it's great, and I think I'm okay at editing, it never really took off. And I kept for years filling out my tax forms saying, yeah, I'm a filmmaker, making $0 or euros from it per year, right. Maybe a little bit here and there. And eventually I was doing so much web development that my wife was just like, why don't you apply for like a development job? I was like, well, I don't even know if I'm good at this actually, because I'd only been doing it for clients and no feedback from peers. But as it turned out, I am pretty good at it. I have a good head for it, and having that validation in place, again, it's been amazing because it clicks for me. It's something that I'm not just good at, but I care about, and that's made a lot of difference.
I think one of the beauties of our industry is that you can be successful, by whatever measure, but you can have a decent living and making money by doing something you really like without needing the education. If you can prove that you can do it, oftentimes that's enough. And
yeah,
I think that's a nice and unique place to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, 5 years on, a little bit of that edge has worn off. There's been, those ups and downs where you're like, I'm terrible at this, right? Nothing's working. And then you sleep on it. And the next day you're like, oh, I know it. I'm a genius. I'm the best ever at this. Yeah. But as you say, I mean, the proof is in, does it work or not? And, that's great. It's not all theory. It's, get your hands in there and can you actually make something render in front of the users? And does that work? It's good to have that faster feedback loop.
Definitely agree. Awesome. Yeah, I think it's super interesting that in our industry, there's a lot of people that are coming from different backgrounds and then get into code and they actually realize like, oh, this is super nice.
To maybe to segue us into what we're eventually going to talk about, but is it got to a point where I'll start over. Before I got into really making money off of coding, I had been doing it as a sort of hobby, if you will, reading CSS tricks articles and saying like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, as far back as 2003, I was building a website for our film company because no one else was the computer guy in the group. And I had some copy of Dreamweaver from some source and put some stuff together in there. But again, it was just a hobby. And I enjoyed it, and I did it in my spare time when I wasn't doing my regular work. And then all of a sudden, it was my regular work, and I still was doing it as a hobby too. And that sort of remains true today. But there was this conscious thing of I'm working all through the week, and now I'm also sort of tinkering around and playing around on weekends. That's nice, but that's not sustainable necessarily. You need to have a proper balance. So it took me a while to actually find a proper balance. And I don't think I still haven't. I'm still doing a lot of coding on the weekends and doing things like that. But the one thing that brought me out of that loop was finding and getting back into Dungeons and Dragons in particular, but tabletop role-playing games.
Very cool. Yeah, and that's what your app, dungeonmastery.app, is all about, right?
Yeah. I since I was a kid, I'd wanted to play D&D. And I never got the chance. I was just in the wrong generation for it. Plenty of my peers, older brothers and sisters had played it, and then it kind of lost popularity. No one my age wanted to play it. Just fine. I've always been like a fantasy nerd anyway. Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time and those kind of books. But it just didn't happen. And then a couple of years ago now, I picked up a few podcasts where people were playing actual D&D just on the podcast and coming up with stories and rolling the dice. And I just listened to those for hours because they were funny and engaging. And it's really weird to listen to a 4-hour podcast of people sitting around a table playing a game, but it's also quite engaging. And I picked up the rules. And eventually one day I said to my wife and my older daughter, who was 11 at the time, I was like, do you guys want to play D&D? And they were like, well, sure. It sounds creative. Let's give it a try. And we invited my wife's brother as well. And we started a campaign. And now we're at least a year and a half into that campaign. We play mostly every week. We have a good average on that. So every Sunday we get together, we play for 2 hours. I have a friend from work as well that plays with us. And it's been so good. It's a different hobby. It's a different outlet. It's still creativity, but it's not thinking about the logic. It's more about the emotions, and it puts you in touch with those sorts of things. It's been super wonderful.
Can totally imagine. And I think it's nice to have something that really interacts with other people, right? And people you care about, like you said, your family, your wife, your daughter. And It's nice. I can imagine it's nice to share something like that with them and not being focused on code. Because at times, personally, I found it complicated to explain people what is so awesome about it. For instance, my fiance really didn't get it initially, and she went to a boot camp. And at this point, she's actually starting to be, she's a junior developer, and she's starting to get into development. And right now, I have to pull her away from the computer. Like, you should really start doing something else because you've been here for 4 hours or 6 hours. And
nice.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to share those kind of things.
Yeah. The way I feel about coding in general is that it's yet another way we have to get into flow. You know, I used to do that when I was editing film stuff as well. You just get into that, time passes and you don't even notice sort of mindset. Yeah. And coding can help with that as well, because you're hyper focused on something. It's good. But the same thing happens when you're playing D&D, because it is, I don't know, it's improvisation. It's being inside of the moment, and you're connecting with other people through this thin veneer of their character. But it's a wonderful experience to reconnect with them in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. You know, encounter things. You know, this person robbed you. You don't want to encounter that in real life and have to deal with that. It's stressful. But if you're doing it around the table, it can be cathartic and a nice experience at the end.
Very interesting. So you've built the app Dungeon Mastery. I think Dungeon Mastery.
Yeah. So when you're playing a game, the one that runs the game, that sort of comes up with all the characters that talk to the players, or when they're rolling, arbitrates the rules, you know, says, please roll this skill check with your dice, things like that. That's the game master, but in D&D, it's the dungeon master. And the thing that led me into this was I had been taking notes as we went through. And, you know, about 6 months in, I had pages and pages and pages. I'm scrolling because it's all digital, but of notes. So many notes. And I was getting overwhelmed. Like, they would decide it was time to leave, like, the Elven Kingdom and go back to the town where they first started. And I was like, oh, no, not just what was the innkeeper's name that they met before, but, like, what did he look like? What did his voice sound like? Was he like, you know, what accent did I even do for him? And I could find it a bit, but it wasn't fast enough. And so I thought, well, you know, and I'm just going to build a little app to make something like linked notes. And that was the genesis. That was like that core idea. And for the first time in all of my side projects, having a singular core idea instead of like 25 things that might work and new features and stuff. Just this, if this works well, everything else can follow suit. It really just all clicked together. And whenever you want, I can start sharing and show you what.
Let's take a look at it. I'm super excited to see. So when you shared the link, I was like, oh, this is a game. I think I even mentioned it in our chat.
Yeah.
I'm going to pop it up the screen. Should appear any second now. There you go. Yeah, so maybe you can walk us through how you've been using it. We're running off localhost. I like this. This is development mode.
Yeah, I have the live URL is up there at dungeonmastery.app, but I figured, and actually this is production data because I haven't gotten Firebase emulators working locally yet, but it's fine.
I'm going to quickly share the URL so people that want to see it. It's dungeonmastery.app. And people can sign up. I signed up, I logged in, and then it started asking me a few questions, which I couldn't really answer. So I put in some dummy data, and then I figured it's way better if you just show me around.
Yeah. And I do need to eventually add an onboarding because it's not necessarily the easiest. You guys are seeing the development version because I'm adding in, finally, payment plans. I wish I'd finished it before the show, but hey, you know, integrating Stripe isn't always that easy. In any case, what you do when you first start is you set up your campaign. So different groups of friends or different storylines that you have, you know, different characters especially, you'd want a campaign for each of those. And mostly you're only going to have one home game that you DM, but some people, they love it. There's actually professional game masters out there.
Wow.
There's people that go from game to game to game, and that's their job now. I think that's really interesting. But this is the one. This is the one with the most data. This is the one that actually is my notes, not just data to help me develop. And the core of the app is, okay, like create some story arcs. So when you first start playing, yeah, the company has to meet, the people have to meet, and then they have to go on a first quest. They have to have a reason to be working together, and then they have encounters along the way. Inside those story arcs, which might take a while to get through, then they have individual sessions. So our first game was last June, and whatever the notes might be for that session, that tells me what happened, what they did, what they encountered. So already you can see some of the basics of this. They met in the Inn of the Seven Rays, and this link here I created by typing at and then typing in the Inn of the Seven Rays. And while this comes up because I already created it, you can also create a record for anything. So if I had a different place, or a different NPC or something like that, I could just create that on the fly while I'm typing. And once it's there, once you've hit enter and linked it, then you can click on it to open up the details of that record and whatever else you need. So this inn has the sign out front, where it is in which city. Actually, oh yeah, it's a sublocation, so it's already listed as being in this kingdom in this city, and there's the inn. Who it's owned by, and that's an NPC, a non-player character. And then I can link to that guy and read the details about him, including things like he swears or sweats a lot, he's unmarried, doesn't know about the secret passage in his wine cellar, things like these details that can really help me dig in as when I'm introducing them to people and having to do voices, as I like to do that. Not all DMs do voices, but I can then bounce back to my notes.
I think if I see this initially, I really like the idea of tagging. I can really see how this makes your life easier if you're in a game and you want to quickly jot down stuff and not forget about it, and later reference it easily as well, which I think paper, even in a digital format, is not suitable for.
Because it builds up. I mean, I have lots and lots of arcs. We've been playing for a long time, and there's just lots and lots of notes. I haven't even finished porting them all over from my old system, which was Workflowy. Workflowy is great. I have a lot of notes in here, but there were things that were getting out of control. So I had all of these in here up to a certain level on all the sessions. But again, if I wanted to see when did they meet this guy, I would have to search for it and then hope I found it. And then where were the notes about him and his characteristics? Were they in the sessions or further down? It was way too much. And a little thing was like this long rest. Like how long have they actually been? How many in-game days has it been since they met? For that, you can just click on a session and say, okay, during this session they slept once, so one more day passed by since they started. Also keeping track of how long we played, because I love those kind of statistics. So over the years it's built up, and I finished this feature the other day for the statistics, so I can see now that we've been playing for 1 year, 5 months. We've had 71 sessions. Like this is what an app can yield for you, and I love that sort of things. How many records do I have? So they've surprisingly, given all they've been through, they've only known each other for a little over a month, which is crazy. That's just how it goes. It's helped immensely, and it wasn't. Development-wise, I've gone through a lot of iterations. Not iterations. This is mostly how it's been, but improvements and refactorings. So it wasn't as simple as opening this at first. There weren't links and things. It was, one thing happened at a time. The other day I added this sort of keyboard shortcut, so you can press Command K or click there to then jump quickly to, let's say I wanted Varel, the Prime Minister guy. I could jump to that record and see all the details of, like, this guy has tons of children and, all that sort of stuff. And adding new features as well. So there's players, locations, NPCs, and then you also have items and history, which was a feature that one of my users suggested we add. It was sort of in the back of my mind, but it's been nice to continue to grow this over time.
Very cool. You say user, so you built this initially for yourself, probably maybe running off localhost while you were first trialing it, and then at some point you decided to put it out there, and I see the product hunt icon. Can you enlighten a little bit on what made you decide to basically publish it? and run with it. And I see you added payment platforms, so it looks like you really got stuff going on and that you want to like basically monetize the project.
Yeah, I wanted to do that since the beginning. I had the idea, and it was, well, I know this community. I know the people that really like playing role-playing games and sit around the tables. And there's one particular online group called Critical Role. They had sort of a record-breaking Kickstarter, and it's not like greed necessarily. It's this idea that there's people that love to play, and this I know is useful because I'm able to use it myself, and having that connection to it has meant there's a product here.
Yeah.
If it takes off or not doesn't actually matter that much, despite the except for the time sink. But again, I'm a user of it, so it is also beneficial to me to further our enjoyment of the game. And when we finish this campaign, we'll start another one, and probably it'll be even more fun at that stage because I'll have notes and linked stuff from the beginning. So yeah, I had that in mind from the start, and the hardest part was choosing when to open it up to users. And that was maybe, I don't know, a month ago or something. I guess I can click on Product Hunt and see. I said, okay, I'm going to put this out there, and, you know, it's not that many users, but when did it go live? I can't see the details. A month ago. Yeah, it's about a month ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very and cool. I said, okay, that's it. And since then, there's been about 350 signups. That's with, I think the full amount of advertising I did was 2 tweets, like subtweets, you know, replies on like well-known art role-playing game people's threads, and going on Zach DeRose's Twitch stream, and that's kind of been it. So it's nice. Once they signed up, the beta users, the ones that got in before October 31st, kind of get a free forever plan. They get access to, well, they have gotten access to the Discord community, but I think I'll keep that open because it's been nice to have people coming in there. I might eventually get too many support requests and need to section it off, but I really enjoy seeing direct feedback from people that are using it and like something or request new features. I added just a little change log in here as well as we've built new things in, new colors and things like that. It's been really cool. But yeah, if you want to, we can start maybe diving into the code base a bit because
yeah, totally.
I really enjoy that.
Yeah, so I think it's a great demo. It's been awesome to see that you've built something that you actually wanted to use yourself. I think that's basically the golden way to start something you need or you from the past need it, and basically start implementing it. And this is generally something that other people need as well. So I think this is a great example, and I'm super excited to hear that there's people actually interested in it. I can totally imagine if there's other people working on paper with this or tools that you used before.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's look at the code, and okay. Maybe you can start with explaining the stack. I tweeted it out as Angular, Firebase, Netlify, and NX DevTools. There's probably more to it, depending on how deep you look.
Sure.
Tailwind.config.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, the first stage was I had already been learning about the monorepo concept from when NX had come out and started getting traction. Before that, I'd been using on my Angular projects at least NgRx and using the store and really enjoying it that way. But once the concept of NX kind of sunk in, I was like, oh, good, another layer of prescription of there's a right way to do this. And the idea of libraries and apps made a lot of sense. Caveat is I don't think I always do it right. I think someone was in the talk with Zach and was like, ooh, that library looks a lot like an app. I get it. I'll clean it up over time. But it's always important to get things going too. So
definitely. That's a balance.
It started with NX, and like I know that you say this blog is non-existent. I was trying to do something else, but I really only have one app in here, and then I have the cloud functions. In another project I've done, I've had the backend here, and when I first started, I was actually using Nest. But once I got into it, I built the whole thing in Nest.js, the backend, and all of the it was a really complex thing because the UI would bounce off to the store, which would bounce off to the effects or the actions to the effects. And then that would come back around and call to the service and to the server. And then the controller within Nest would pass that off and so on. But then I realized I'm not doing this locally. I need a database. I don't want to deal with databases. Yeah. So then I picked up Firebase. And by the time I got that set up, I realized, oh, I don't actually need a backend. That's my backend. And for anything I do, like authorization, I can put it inside this, Cloud Functions, which I'll show towards the end because that's the last thing I've been working on lately.
Very cool.
But yeah, the basics of it really is that you have your application, you have your entry points and some lazy loaded modules for different things. And then down in the libraries, you have the stuff that does the real work. So the presentation versus the, actual functionality layer.
Right.
Let's see, where should we start? I mean, other parts of the stack before we dive too much deeper in. You're right. I set up Tailwind for my CSS. Go ahead.
No, what I generally do when I inspect other people's app, I generally start with the app module, look at the routes, and see what basic things are there. I think a lot of logic can be deducted from like, okay, this route does this thing.
Sure. Well, there's a bunch of stuff in here. This one always gets really complicated, but I can show you the app routing module, which is not very much. Homepage is just a few. I didn't want to use any. Again, I didn't even want to use database for the content, so I don't have. I'm not going to set up Scully or any of those sort of things yet for writing Markdown files and stuff. For the privacy in terms of service for now, at least, and for some of the more descriptive pages, it's just hard-coded in the HTML. Yeah. And then I have the auth route, which is sort of new, though the login was working early on. It wasn't an actual lazy loaded route until recently. And then I have the campaign. So once you're logged in and can have access to this, then it's in its own place. That's kind of it.
Right. Yeah. This looks super straightforward. So basically the meat of the app is inside campaigns, if I can spot it from here.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have the campaign overview page, which is the one where you can see the actual, do you have existing campaigns or not? And then go into each one of those at a certain route. And then the campaigns routing module, I guess we can check that. That means a little more complicated. You have the sort of wrapper component, and then inside those are the details, which has inside it a few things. I'm doing a weird little thing here with the record details. I wanted it to be a route, so it showed up in the URL, but it's kind of a modal.
Right.
Same thing is actually true for I want. Well, anyway, I'm not going to get into this because I won't actually show it. But I have a few times where I'm using a route where it's not really a route; it's just a modal, but it's fine. It works.
And it works as a route to the extent that if you visit it in like a new tab, it will pop up the modal window.
That's true as well. Yeah, it will. Right now it won't because I've been messing around with something with the auth where it bounces to auth first and then it loses the route. But yeah, eventually it will do that. Yeah. In the current live version, it does that. So that's nice too. And that makes currently it's one user, you have to log in and you see your own stuff. There's no sharing. Eventually there'll be public things. You can tag sections as public. That will be the eventual thing that can happen. So you can share with your players certain notes and keep certain notes private.
Very cool.
Yeah. Maybe we get into some of these. Well, all right. I'll start by showing something like this. This is the meat of how this all works. It took me a while to get it setting up. So back to the actual app. When I'm typing in here, I'll go to my demo so I don't mess with my real stuff. I have this testing app. So when I'm here at one of these campaigns and I'm starting to type, right, this custom text field, it's debounced. So that's a bug. I'll fix that eventually. It's debounced so it doesn't like spam the server too often, but basically every so often as you stop typing, it'll save what you've changed to the server. And it's just a JSON object of this text. But I'm using under the hood is Quill.js. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yeah, which means that if you inspect the HTML, these little custom things, come on, DevTools, pay attention to me. Oh, this one, no, let's do this one. These are, I took the Quill Mentions plugin and just stripped it apart and made it my own. It was kind of working, but yeah, these end up getting injected directly into the HTML or to the JSON. So let's take this as an example. We're on the campaign details, and inside the component itself, eventually here, you've got all of the top of the page and the header. Past this, we have now the arcs. So we have the campaign arcs, and they're sort of titles and some SVG stuff. And then eventually we have the sessions that render inside those, and there. Now we have this component called Dungeon Mastery Linked Notes. So the namespace for everything here is Dungeon Mastery.
Right.
These linked notes they just take the all records. So I kind of wanted to make them dumb. Oh, there's some messiness here over observables and who knows what exists in the store and all of that. But this eventually you pass in what the current record is and the records, and then it gives you this field. It generates this field. So in this particular case, for each of these sessions here, you get one of these fields. And then if I go into the actual library, which supports this and creates this component, we can go into more details, yeah?
Definitely.
So this library is just the mastery module. I have the UI in there, even though it potentially shouldn't be. But I put it in there because I wanted it. This feels to me like the same domain.
Right.
It's really responsible for formatting and keeping track of the records themselves. And why bounce back to the app just to send back up to the service or for the library again? I'm not. I might change my mind eventually.
I think, Lars Brink and I did a 3-piece session about how to structure NX Workspace, and it kind of is, I'd say it's guided by the best practices presented by the Narwhal team in their book, Angular Monorepo and Angular Monorepos, Best Practice for Enterprises, I think is what it's called. And it kind of, it suggests dividing these two up into a feature, which is actually your code, in this case, your component, and the data axis, and that's a separation of concerns there. In general, though, I've been working with NX since release, and I've went to maybe 5 or 10 structures that I tried, iterated on, and And in any case, we're just checking out how it works. I think it's very powerful to see that a lot of people are basically struggling with making decisions on how to do this in a nice way, and you have like reasons why you pick one over.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's look, like we said at the beginning of the show. If it works, that's what matters a lot. You can refactor these things later. Okay,
small interruption. Chow just joined here. He says, "Hey guys, hey Chow, nice to have you." And then he goes on and asks, "Curious about the editor font."
Oh, let's find out. I don't remember anymore what it's called.
The F looks wicked in NGF. I agree.
It's Dank Mono. It's like one of the first times I bothered to buy a thing, and you have to turn the font linkatures on as well. I like it.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. So, if it works, it's most important. And I think in any case, in most of the apps, there's always things to doubt about, like how to do this, how to put it, how to name it. And I think most important is getting it out there.
Yeah. And for me as well I'm trying to think a little long term. And this, even though this stuff is UI, it's really tied closely to how the app is going to work and can be extended. So let's say I ever have a second app. I mean, again, this is the kernel of what this functionality is this linked notes component. Yeah. For me, it needs to be in its own place, even though it's going against the principle of having a UI often in, well, not having an UI off in the library. It's not that, but having it also tied in with the data. Like this is also tied together for me. I currently I can't pull it apart. Well, I mean, I'm sure I could, but I don't want to. Okay, so to dive in a little bit to this particular component and how it works, because this has gone through a number of iterations, but moving this one aside, when it opens up and gets started, I'm using a lot of RxJS to get the current record from, not everyone's going to be familiar with this. I learned this at some stage. I don't remember from who actually, but maybe Todd Motto. But taking an input and immediately using getters and setters to turn it into a behavior subject.
This is very interesting.
So you can use it. I've used that a lot, like even since version 4 came out. I think maybe it was a little bit later, but I started really getting into that because I liked reactive programming. I liked this streams and setting it up, and I was annoyed that my inputs weren't in those streams and I had to reference a value outside of them. So what this pattern gives you is you create a behavior subject, you pass in the value as soon as it's set. So whenever the parent changes, this will fire an event. And then if you ever did need to reference it, you also can just grab the behavior subject's value, which is also nice. Technically, you don't need this if you never type this.currentRecord. So,
if you don't need like synchronous access to it, you can just subscribe to current record $, and you'll be golden. Yeah, but
exactly.
I really like what I see here. And you basically convert your input as soon as you get it to an observable stream, and then you can do reactive programming, RxJS logic on top of that.
And the other thing is you kind of bypass at that stage ng on init and after init and all of that. Like the value is there when it's there, which also is pretty good. So yeah, I do some dance here with getting what might be coming from the current record and doing a JSON parse of the actual notes object, which in this particular case is something that Quill has a format for. It's more or less a DOM node that's been converted, a delta, as they say. But then update the actual notes object on the page so you can see what's being rendered. And then that Quill editor, which I can show you over here, this Quill editor on the page, whenever the content changes, it bounces off to the content changed. And then that in particular triggers some other events. So
this is also where you do the debounce, I imagine.
Yeah, this is notes updated, which, so if I drag back down to here, as long as it's not programmatic, I'll update this behavior subject for notes updated, or subject for notes updated. And then when that fires, I'll debounce just by a second. So you have a little bit of time.
Right, to type. And I think the interesting thing is when it's not programmatic, you use Firebase as the backend. Does this mean you still have the Firebase goodness that if somebody else would change it in one other location, you would get the updates on your page as well?
I haven't messed around with that yet because I don't. If I understood correctly, when I was looking into it, you can take the records themselves as observables from Firebase on the page, but that for me was very tied to the component and was not with NgRx. So I automatically was like, I don't like doing that. Plus, it takes a bit of the control out of my hands. So I didn't want to mess with that at all. So no, instead,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, instead of doing that, instead of listening to Firebase at all, Firebase is just any backend right now. The way this works in the code is the component sets up the thing when this is typing. When you're typing, it converts it to what it needs to be, which is what all this mess is, because I have some linked records that need to be parsed out and turned into the right format. But eventually it emits the same record with the new notes. So that whole record, all the details that might be in there and all the notes that are in there, it stringifies them and passes them up. And then it outputs that from this linked notes component. So then we, at this stage, bounce back over to the details component where we have this, and this is the notes updated, which updates the record details. The record details uses my facade, which not everyone likes facades. I didn't either. I've learned to like them. and then I'll update the record details there. So this then bounces back to NgRx and the store, and eventually once it gets to the service, it will go to Firebase.
Right. Yeah. So basically, as soon as the data comes from Firebase, you capture it and you do whatever you like with it. And as you said, it can be any backend. It's at that point it's backend agnostic, and you just use Firebase as a dump data store. Well, I guess that's smart, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, so like the facade here. Oh, it's one of my daughter's friends coming to visit. The facade here is the reason I liked it. I was mentioning this to Brandon from the NgRx team, who doesn't necessarily like it, but I like it because I don't have to type this particularly all over the place. In a previous project, I had really gotten annoyed with this when I had multiple store bits. So I had 6 or 7 different things like this, these state libraries, and I didn't like having to know in my app which ones I was referencing. Yeah. So for me, that's the biggest benefit to a facade is I just call the store. I call the facade itself if I need to access that. The typing is kind of inherited. I don't need to know about that. And it's been helpful. It's helped me keep organized. It's another layer of boilerplate potentially, but it's been nice. Down here towards the bottom, you have all of these, what dispatch the actual actions. So some people use dispatch as another method. I didn't see the point in that. So I just directly, when I call create user or load all campaigns, I dispatch the action I need to with whatever arguments I might need to. And at that stage, we're into the actions. The actions get picked up by the effects and go out to the reducers if need be. But in the effects is where currently, I'm not sure this is the best way, but up here at the top, I'm pulling in FireAuth to insert in, basically, use this one. It's not the right example. This one, not the new stuff here. Using with latest from the FireAuth user to just include my user ID along with every time I call to the service, so that I don't remember precisely why I did that, other than that it felt weird to have the service being a little bit outside of the flow, not knowing whether or not this auth object was ready yet or not when the actions were being dispatched. Yeah.
Right.
So I passed those in, and then you can do something in the service, which is down here, to actually create the campaign. And for this, you use Angular Firestore, create, access this collection, add the campaign along with the owner already sort of put into place in the case of this created. And it gets really complex with the number of records here, but everything lives in this file. So you can see it's quite long, actually. Yeah, 500 lines or something, but it works. It keeps it in its own place.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. This is where you probably search and replace for stuff if you need to adjust things and look up stuff. So it seems nice to keep it isolated.
Yeah, and I also moved my cloud functions in here as well, which is, at first I was doing them just to get them working from the app itself. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. This is all part of the same backend. If I need to authorize or create a new user in Stripe, maybe it belongs in an authorization module separately, but at the very least, it's tied intrinsically to the user themselves, who is the owner of these records. So yeah, I'm still up in the air about where that data should all live together. But for now, it lives in here. So when I need to, I call my Netlify functions to create the customer with whatever data I need and get back, and then create the Firestore users.
Cool. So the functions you're using you're not using Google Cloud Functions, the Firebase provided cloud functions?
No, when I first tried, I tried to set them up, and it just didn't work. I don't know. It was probably something stupid on my side, and that's fine. But when I hit a wall, I tend to look for other routes first before trying to go through the wall. And in this case, Netlify was already my hosting. And The only reason I'm not using them for identity is because identity wasn't free at first, whereas Firebase was. So yeah, Netlify ended up being pretty straightforward. They have this nice Netlify dev environment now. So I basically can see without actually needing to publish anything. It's not quite an emulator. It doesn't go so far as that, but it does the proxying that you would need to for you. So I don't have to write any special code. I just bounce it to Netlify, and it knows, oh, if you're already running Netlify dev, that's at localhost 8888, and anything that goes to 8888/.netlify will bounce into Netlify dev and get routed to the right place. So
Very cool.
In this particular case, there's another project that lives here, mastery functions, and inside that, well, in the main.ts, I just do a bounce for the route. So I say, let's strip out the, what comes after the actual endpoint, and if it's create customer, I'll run this function, otherwise this, etc. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but it's working so far. I'm sure I'll run into problems and clean it up eventually.
Very cool. Yeah, I thought when I saw mastery functions and we talked about Firebase, I thought it was Firebase, but cool to see how you basically mix and match cloud providers and use whatever works. I think in general that's a good lesson from this session that we're doing. Like, use whatever works, and it's important to make it work first.
Definitely.
I think there's a saying: make it first, make it first, make it right, make it fast. I always mix up the last two, but that's basically the thing. The most important thing is that it works, and then you can always optimize and make it pretty later. I've been tempted a lot to do premature optimization and make sure everything is perfectly formatted, etc., etc. Spend a ton of time, but never get the app actually out there. And
I know that feeling, and like that's one of the reasons I just set myself the goal of like, well, get this out there, get it live, get the payment thing. Like you had to choose one thing at a time, but is the core of this working the way it should? No? Well, focus on that. Don't worry about how it looks. Like, I'm no designer. I'm happy with the way the app looks now, but there's rough edges. I mean, when I close DevTools, it actually feels a little imbalanced to me. I get that. But at the same time, you can use it. It's not breaking. The shortcut to find this also doesn't look the best, but it's working. And the other stuff we can figure out later. I mean, look at how awful certain products that we know and love have looked for ages before they finally got a revamp. Google stuff in particular. The functionality comes first, and then the other stuff.
I totally hear it. And Chow chimes in: make it work, make it right, make it fast. That's the thing. I have another example that I just recently realized that this is a great thing. When you're in GitHub and you have like 3 pull requests and you merge one, the counter in the top of the thing doesn't update. It still says 3 pull requests. And you basically have to refresh in order for it to reflect. And now this is kind of logic with their setup, because they're not a single page app. It's a Ruby on Rails monolith, and they just do server-side rendering classic way. So it makes total sense. But I think the mere fact that a company as big as GitHub, with the funds that they have, doesn't bother about fixing something that probably a lot of us devs would be obsessing about. Like, now it doesn't update, and now you can go through all the hassle of doing it. The same goes if you have like one commit in a repo, it says one commits. So it doesn't have the pluralized logic. This is something I've built in apps that never got into live, but I spent at least maybe like 3 hours in my whole life getting pluralization right for apps that never worked. So I totally, and it's inspiring to see that you basically apply this sentiment.
Yeah, well, my story here in particular was I nearly got derailed again, as I often have in the past, by doing that with this app. But what prevented me from doing so was, one, just pushing past that impulse at the start and being like, yeah, I know it doesn't look good. I'll just use material like for the modals and stuff. I'll clean it up eventually. But then I was like, okay, I need to spend a little time with this. And rather than trying to do it myself, I was like, okay, I'm going to try Tailwind as well. Like, I'd done a little bit myself. I'm like, I'm just going to move everything in the app over to Tailwind so that when I want to do the new stuff, I've at least got a system in place. And thankfully that just blew my mind, and it makes everything so much easier to design on the fly. So
Yeah.
I'm really happy with how the create new items screen looks, in terms of you can choose a player and their title and stuff. And I hate dealing with forms and all of the styling elements and things like that. It just came together so nicely because I was using Tailwind. Yeah.
I definitely like the look of it. I really like that it has an own identity, and I'm not sure, but maybe it has to do also with your background being a filmmaker. I think you're a visual guy that already, like, I think you're interested in that things look nice, and it really reflects. And when I first visited DungeonMastery.app, I was like, oh, this is a game. So this was the first intent, the first thing you had.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that's good, and it's definitely a unique look. Animate these like the books, the decorations here. Did you do this yourself as well?
No, I'm no artist. I can do stuff. And my style wouldn't look that different from this, but it wouldn't look as good. The same was always true of me with photography. I know enough to have a strong opinion, and I know when it works, but I don't know how to make it work. So I'm aware that there's a little bit of a weirdness with this extra space here, but it didn't look good when I had these things on all four sides either. I know I like this style, but it took me forever surfing through thousands of images on one of those sites to find the ones so they all matched. It's not my strong suit, so I'm grateful for something like here's a specific example with Tailwind. What I would struggle over for ages was trying to figure out the spacing between things, how much padding there should be, right? And I would come up with arbitrary numbers, and I'd forget what those were. I might abstract them to a SAS variable at some stage, but not necessarily. But now Tailwind just has a handful of them. And, I've chosen in this case to have the margin top and bottom be 16. But if that wasn't working, I would try MY, and there's only a certain number that are available anyway. 12 is the one before 16. So is that better, or is 16 better? I don't know. Play around with the limited scale until it looks okay to my eyes. That has done wonders for speeding up the flow. Whereas before I would have agonized for hours, I'm done in 10 minutes. Like this whole page took me maybe 3 hours to put together. In the past, it would have taken a lot longer. Because I would have freaked out over every little spacing issue and whether it's correctly aligned and are the columns okay, and so on and so forth.
I definitely hear that, and I've been using Bootstrap for like basically since its inception. I think when one came out, before I was using a thing called Blueprint CSS, which basically gave me the same thing, just some nice defaults that work well. I'm not a designer myself, and with Bootstrap, I learned to love using utility classes and don't obsess about details. So try to not write CSS if you can just use margin X, margin Y, or padding for that matter. And also try to use the same numbers throughout the app. So I've generally default to like I'm doing in Bootstrap then margin 3, margin 5, margin 3 for non-responsive, for responsive devices, and margin 5 for big ones. And if you apply these kind of things, your app looks more professional, like already, if you don't obsess about these defaults. Do you have any other Tailwind specific things you learned, or you learned to love, or you've used?
Yeah, definitely. Let's go maybe to the what's an easy enough one to see? Well, we can go to like the campaign stats component, something like this. I mean, one thing you'll see is that there's no CSS files kind of anywhere in here. Even as I get into form, I need to refactor this. There's too many little forms. It's unnecessary. But I don't need any custom CSS. And when I do, it all sort of lives either in here where there's just a few for the background images, or in the much. And it really is only when I want to do something to save myself some time or do a really custom rule. Like I apply throughout, not basing it off of a class for this color, but based off of a data, because I already have this here as part of how the component actually needs to be rendered. Why not just use it for CSS as well? I'll show that here. So like this here, eventually this will become live because I want people to see what it's like to edit and reference right here on the homepage. But all this is a span with the data collection and the class dimension, and then it gets the right color. So later on, if I ever want to change, let's say this red is the wrong shade, it's already, anytime I reference NPCs anywhere, it's referencing this red. Well, then I will just update that in a single place and it'll just cascade right on down.
I really like this.
I really like it too.
Yeah, it's pretty smart, I'd say. Yeah, you can just show, but using the mere data collection, because I assume the data collection is handled somewhere totally different where you don't care about style. You basically just tell which collection this item belongs to and then run with it. So
do something annoying here. One's red. Damn.
It's the first one, I think. FF0000.
Cool. So get a really ugly red, and then let's see how that looks. First page. Oh, I'm looking forward to Angular 11 for hot module reloading.
Yeah. At this point, I think it doesn't work with the Tailwind integration, depending on what you need, but because they have a custom builder to do the custom webpack config, and that one's not updated for HMR yet.
No.
But yeah, here you go.
That doesn't look that bad. I don't think it changed. That doesn't seem like the right red. Oh, I know what it is. It's that the listeners, the watchers, don't pick up on changes in the config. So I would have to refresh this, which I can do. I'm going to just run this. I was doing this earlier today because I upgraded to Tailwind 2 earlier today. I'll just do the serve.
Yeah, I saw you being enthusiastic about it on Twitter. I'm pretty new to Tailwind. I was interested in it, and my initial thought was like, wow, this is just Bootstrap, but then with more steps, which is like the naive way. But what sold me was watching the course from Adam on his homepage, tailwindcss.com/course. It really blew my mind. Presentation is awesome. And also, I love how passionate this guy is about his project.
Yeah, me too.
It really sold me with like, yeah, this is definitely the way I want to program and do my styles.
I'd watched a talk, like when Tachyons was out. Like most people, I was just like, this is horrifying. I don't want to put all these class names into the, the code base. But then, a year or so went by. I'd used Bootstrap as well, and I literally prevented one of my colleagues from using this kind of thing in there because I was like, how am I supposed to remember PX? Which now doesn't seem so hard to me. But at the time, I was just like, I don't like this. But then I watched a talk by Sarah Diane. Anyway, a really good talk. And she broke down, and she used Adam Wathan's kind of over his take on it as well, but it just kind of clicked for me why you want to do it this way. And one of my thing was I had been using like display flex everywhere in my apps, and over again you would see display flex. I remember one time, one code base, there were 72 times I had typed display flex in the CSS. And okay, it's not a huge difference to move over into the CSS class, which is flex, right, within Tailwind.
Yeah.
I could just do that. But that's a little bit shorter, one. And two, it was never just flex. It was also always combined with justify left, or justify center, or items align, all that stuff. And that was like, for me, that was the biggest eye opener was, oh, now I'm drastically shrinking how much code goes in because I only write those, very small things. The other thing that really made it click for me was the IntelliSense of being able to be inside a class bracket and type space and get the whole list to come up, because you forget what they are. Like, oh, what was the first few weeks was like, what was the thing for background again? It wasn't BA. Oh, it's BG. Okay, I got that. And then you already have your colors. So I was like, what's my red again? Oh, this is their red. and so on and so forth. It was quite intuitive after a while.
Yeah, very cool. I really like the idea of having it all in one file, and so you don't have to move back to your CSS. I'm not a designer. I'm not a CSS person. I know my way around CSS. I know my hacks. I know when to use a negative margin to position something pixel perfect. But having to use these tools and not writing CSS, I think is becoming basically a life goal at this point for me developing software.
There's the ugly red.
Yeah, there you go. It reapplied.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. In this case, that didn't change because it's named red, not NPC. So
right, yeah.
I had a separation between the two in particular. So that's nice. I think it's great. I'm going to continue to use it and push it. I went so far as to, like, when I was replacing the modals for like this new record, I maintained a bit because I'm using the Angular CDK to do the overlays and such, but I didn't want the material design stuff. So I really stripped out almost all of that as much as I could and removed the material style sheet entirely. So I just have a single file where the stuff that I couldn't quite get rid of is here. And there's not that much of it, 135 lines of code eventually. And I've been applying Tailwind to those as well. When possible, not always. I don't know why I didn't do this. Whatever. I'm not going to fix it up now. But it just has been so nice to get that stuff out of the way so that I'm making all the decisions actually. And that I'm consistent with my decisions too. So that's, I don't know. I know I've tried to give a talk on it before, and normally I give talks and I can do a good job. Somehow this I'm too emotionally close to right now. I really, really like it, but I'm not able to articulate well enough in my mind why it's so much better for me. But I'm sticking with it. I really like it.
Yeah, I think personally I have to prevent myself from rewriting all my projects that I'm working on in Tailwind at this moment, because I got stuff to bring to the table basically. But yeah, I'm super impressed with it. I think it really, for me personally, it really goes well with the workflow I already had, which was using Bootstrap extensively, and then using custom components. So I'm the type of developer that will write a button component, like call it UI button, so I don't have to type button and then apply the classes and a click handler, and I'll add some smart logic to the buttons. This goes really well with something like Tailwind, because I think one of the biggest critiques it gets is like, yeah, you have like these huge class names. Well, yes, that's true. It saves you from a bunch of CSS, and it's declarative, which I like. And in my apps, I'm already pulling these kind of things into separate components anyway. So I really feel like it's a great match. And yeah, it's just an awesome project.
That's a really good point as well. It's the idea of, yeah, when you start repeating the same classes over and over again, you probably you intended to do a component. So when I was initially setting up one of these, the campaign overview, no, the details page, and I had on the side here these sections, like, for each of the different record types. I initially just had them all here in the code base over and over and over again. And I was like, when I was adjusting them to say like, okay, what is the formatting of this header look like, adding this new button in and stuff, and I was like doing it 6 times. I was like, no, I need to be using a loop. I need to be using a template here. So eventually that reduced into this kind of code, and then I write it all in one place. So it also helps you with this kind of code smell, where you might not recognize it until later, that you need to extrapolate to a component, or at least a template.
But also, I like what you refer to here is, I think, a very sane way of figuring out what's a component. First, duplicate it and don't worry about it too much. And then if you squint your eyes, and I've literally put next to each other 2 files and just switch tabs, and you can see like, oh, I only changed like 3 positions in this thing. That's going to be a component. These are going to be the inputs, maybe your outputs, and yeah, that's a very sane way of doing it, I think.
I don't know how we're doing on time. I don't know if it matters to your stream or not. I have one other thing I want to show.
Yeah, go ahead. For me, it's 12 in the afternoon, so I basically got the whole weekend in front of me. So we can move on now, but
Okay.
let's touch on whatever you want to show, and then maybe plug some stuff, and then we can wrap it up there.
Okay. So this is about the modals and stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So I was feeling really constrained, in particular, by the way of doing modals within the CDK. So you have this idea of the dialogue, right? This material dialogue. And when you go in to edit a particular thing and you want to pop open this dialogue, you use the, well, forget about the configuration necessarily, but you pass through what data you might need, some properties like max width and panel classes, and then you create a subscription so that it opens the whatever you need the dialogue to open with the config. And then after it closed, there's this kind of subscription where you get the response back. And then it can do things like delete a record or update the details. And I started getting really frustrated that the parent component needed to know about what the modal was doing. Because for me, modals were often not very dumb. A good use case for this was like, okay, yeah, I want to create this record, but what if the record fails? What if I click this and it doesn't work? So I've already closed the dialog in order to trigger the backend because it's only the parent component that knows about it. How do I actually know that it worked? And it took that decision out of my hands by using the CDK for this. I'll eventually refactor this, but what I did for something else like this, the record itself, I don't even remember where it is now. Open record, update record details. Let's see. Oh, I took it out completely. Open new record dialog. Here we go. All I do from the parent component now is open this dialog. Then the dialog itself, in this case, the create record component, which I'll jump to, that then handles doing all it needs to. So it actually isn't dumb anymore. It imports the facade, which is currently why it's living actually in that library. Maybe it shouldn't, but I wanted it a little closer to the wire. It's going to be a smart thing. Yeah. Then in particular, this will do whatever it needs to. And when it eventually, you hit create, it bounces its data around and can fire off to whatever it needs to, particular to that individual record. Then this one I've shown off before. I really like this pattern. Tell me what you think. All right, really quickly. When it's finished, it then just closes the dialog. But what I'm doing in here is this create record. You see, I'm returning it as a UUID. So right in the facade, maybe this isn't the right place for it to live, but inside the facade create record, I create a UUID and then pass that in to the store as part of what this record has as a property. It's an optional property within the record. Then I dispatch that. And then you don't know when it's happened, but then I return back to whatever called this from the facade, that UUID. So if something went wrong, yeah, I could probably handle it here. But then I know this and I can track it. And that UUID will persist all the way through, even calling off to the backend. It doesn't get sent to the backend, it doesn't get sent to Firebase, but it does get sent to the reducer and ends up when that update record or create record, well, it's most useful for create record. When that is changed in the and added to the reducer, to the store, then that's been persisted. So then this record component can create a subscription listening specifically for a record that has that UUID. And as long as once it exists, I should probably do take one on this. But yeah, and then it can close. And potentially also handle failures and things like that. So I like that pattern.
I think it's definitely interesting. I see it as some sort of signaling mechanism where you don't have to keep track of something, but you just gave it some unique ID, which you can later refer to. You don't really care about what it is.
No, I don't. Yeah.
What surprises me from seeing is that you have several types of records here that you're creating, but you just call into the same create record method on the facade, and then so the record knows which type it is, I assume. So it has like some sort of collection information.
Yeah. Each of these already knows its collection, and that's
Right.
built in from like the very start. So it has to know that, because there's also, I mean, there's different default properties, and they share a lot of the footprint, but they're not identical by any stretch. I did some crazy TypeScript stuff. I'll go to my interfaces and show some of that maybe, just to get this to work. So let's scroll down before we go back to those. So each record can potentially have these, but doesn't at first, right? But they all have to have a title. Like that's an imperative one. They all have to have created and updated. Well, they don't really have to, but sure, why not? That doesn't necessarily bother me. But they won't have an ID at first. They'll never. They don't have to have one of those, and they won't have an owner until you've actually verified with Firebase. So they share that because they're coming from Firestore. But then they start to deviate already. So this campaign has these special properties that are different, whereas the other types of notes records, they share more. So they all have to be referenced for a campaign. They all have notes. They all have a collection, but some of them have this and some don't. And then what's this record collection map? Oh, they all also, I'm storing the references to each other here. So when an NPC references a player in their notes, I want a quick way to know that they have done so. So I can show like let's say Sindrine, I can show this list on the side to say Prime Minister Val referenced them without having to do a huge dance. So that also is being stored there. Anyway, there's a lot of back and forth, and then the actual definitions themselves are whatever they need that's very specific to them. And then this is my favorite thing. There's two things here, but one was this must-have. So when I'm creating a campaign or creating a record, this must-have does some weird dance, but it basically says it has to have, it should have the shape of this, so it can have whatever campaign is, but it has to have title, shortcode, and color. You cannot create a campaign without those three properties. So ID isn't here. If I just said ID, I would have to, I mean, it prevents me from creating optional ones when I don't want to, but still being able to pass through the right shape. And then this other one here, where is it? Yeah, this really complicated thing of the notes record itself, of it extends this whatever you pass in, which is a type of master record. So it only takes it if it's one of these record types that already exist. You can't just pass anything into here, but it shares the stuff that needs to be shared. I mean, that took me to like a week and a half to find something that worked. It was really messy before that.
I see you're super strong on using types, and I think that's really a needed thing. If you have something as basically lenient as Firebase as a backend, which basically allows you to store whatever in there, you have to do it at some point. And it's super interesting to see. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you a question. Not sure if you have an answer or not, but if you would start from scratch today, building Dungeon Mastery with all the knowledge you accumulated by building this project, is there anything you would approach differently, or you wish you'd known before? There are things that are hard to change.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have wasted so much time with making my own backend. Like, that's not my strength. I just and I knew that, but I thought it was what was necessary. So I would have skipped that and just gone for something like Firebase that handles that. Look for those things as well, like the auth. I even feel like there's room with this Stripe integration for someone to come in and do that a little more simply as well, or maybe Stripe to extend and offer a new product, because that's been more complex than I feel is necessary. There's too many edge cases for me to think through. Right. It would be nice if someone could do that for me, which is, that's where things are going.
Yeah.
The other thing would be, I don't know, get more opinions on how to structure this library. I'm a little just nervous about the stuff that's in here. It feels like it's not right. It works, and that's great. Occasionally I do try and do it, like with this UI stuff. I have this thing here, but I end up needing certain components that need to know the router state and potentially affect the router state. Like I wanted to create a particular kind of button here at one stage, and I just couldn't do it because it needed to have a certain knowledge of what the route was. And I don't know, I don't remember exactly the use case, but basically I'd written the whole thing here and then it couldn't live here. It couldn't be dumb enough for that. So then I had to move it back into the app, things like that. That's still not a solved problem.
Right. Yeah. With regards to the structure, I think my initial opinion, I haven't looked at the code base myself, but having you shown around me, is make more libraries. More libraries. Libraries are cheap in the sense that like they're easy to make, easy to handle. You can rename and move them quickly using NgRx generate. Yeah. And for me, having the types of libraries in there, that was when it clicked. Like, this is what I've been doing wrong, because I tried to split it up and I've tried to make things have a logical place, but I didn't really have the feel for when to decide what goes where. And at this moment, this stage, I know exactly, okay, if I have NgRx logic, it's going to live in data access, but in my data access, never going to have a component, not a single one. Right. Data access can import from each other, but they can never import from a feature, which is where your component is. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Like, your data access layer should never have to refer to a feature, which is your components. Yeah. And then
that does make sense.
And then the smart components are your features, which is where you actually route to and where you inject like your state and your services, and you do like the heavy lifting. And then you have a UI library for all of the presentational components. And that in your case could be, for instance, a campaign UI. So you have one UI library with only dump components for only rendering stuff related to campaign. Mm-hmm. And I think the last one, which I would almost say is a violation, but I'm not here to judge, and please don't take it this way, but the app should be basically 3 files: main.ts, app component, which renders a router outlet, and an app module, and all the rest goes into the library. So you never have the idea, I need to pass something back into my app, because from that moment on, it's all libs. And that already makes it easier to realize. So that's like basically the gist of the 4 hours we did with Lars, trying to go through my code base and refactoring it. But I'd be happy to jump on a session. We can do it off camera, but jump on a session and look at it with you. But it's a difficult thing. The book Narwhal, the book Angular Monorepos for Enterprise by Narwhal is free from Narwhal Connect. I'll link it in the description for people that are watching this later. I'll send it to you after the talk. It's I think 30 pages. It's very lightly written. You go over it in like an hour, and it really drives home these things like, this is why they do it this way. And
I mean, we can talk about it afterwards as well, because being self-taught, a lot of these concepts, it makes for harder reading. You know, I remember someone sent me like the Gang of Four book or, page at one stage, and I was just like, this is meaningless to me right now. I mean, I intuit what patterns are. I intuit how this stuff should work. So it's a learning curve. I did try at one stage to set up this, because that was my biggest thing, the scoping between them and what actually shares. And I haven't gotten it right yet. So I have this utils library where I have this from NetBasal, this auto and subscribe. So I don't have to take one all the time. But when I import it in other places, let's see, /utils, it yells at me, which is fine. I just ignore it. But it shouldn't yell at me. And maybe it stopped recently.
Yeah, it's probably for the demo. No, there you go. Squiggly lines are there already.
Yeah, it says, you shouldn't be doing that. But I'm like, I think it's fine to do it, in particular because this is just a function. It's not even I'm not even importing the whole module.
Right. No, and this is probably something that is basically a naming thing. But I think if you if you can open tsconfig.base.json from the root of the project for a second, that's basically the quickest glance on, and then the path property. You have like 5, or maybe, there you go, you have like 5 libraries. A quick thought, my app, the latest app that I'm working on, I'm like 50 libraries. And they keep on extending. And if I add a new feature, so I would work on the section that, like maybe you have a player backend, I'll at least spin up 3 for the front end, which is the data access feature and UI. And I made my life easier by building a workspace schematic, which is a great feature in NX. And I can just say, hey, workspace schematic, scaffold out for me a player feature. And this goes, create the data access, creates the feature itself, and creates the UI module. I might delete some of them because some UI doesn't need, some parts of the app don't need data access, or some of them, they don't really need their own UI stuff. But this made my life really easier. And then because this grows unwildly, I now added tools that sort this logic. So my path object here is sorted by key. My tsconfig, my NxJSON is sorted, and my workspace.json as well, or AngularJSON.
Yeah, that helps a lot because it's hard to find stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, there is this and all, so I'm sure I could use that to help figure it out. But even this is, it's
it gets huge, and I've learned to embrace that and basically run with it and take it to the extreme, and it really served me well. So that's probably some nice stuff to look into. But yeah,
cool.
I think there's always room to optimize, and I really admire how you went from idea to implement it. Well, actually from need, I'd say, to idea of building something, and that really inspires me.
I'll stop sharing now. That's the strongest thing. I tell my proteges and conference talks as well. I say, scratch your own itch. Find something that you need solved first. Work through that. It's the fastest way to learn, because you're not arbitrarily, making a to-do app when you don't need one because you already have a good one. Make something that you really need.
Awesome. Yeah. Great words to live by. Evan, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else you'd like to plug? You like to shed a light on? Anything goes?
Just if you're interested and you want to share this, please delay by just a little bit so I can get the payment thing up and we get that flood going in. But no, sign up, play around with it, and share with your friends if you want to. I'm excited to see that working. Other than that, no, enjoy the rest of the year, you guys, and have a good holiday season and recover from the madness the world has been in.
Those are also wise words to live by. Thanks a lot for being here. I'll be around next week, BLS13. I got Preston Lamp. We'll be talking more NX and Angular, and we're going to look at how to deploy it on Google Cloud Run. So I'm super excited about that, doing some auto deployment stuff. Thanks, everybody, for watching. This has been it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.